Hey guys, tonight we step out beneath a bronze desert sky, where the heat still wobbles above the sand like a mirage, and your sandals feel faintly toasted, as if they've been whispering complaints about your life choices all afternoon. You're in ancient Persia, the land of high plateaus and long shadows, where daytime sun bakes clay into brick and nighttime air suddenly remembers how to be kind. You're going to stroll through lantern-lit alleys, past water jars sweating with condensation, and you're going to hear a rumor that should be impossible. Somewhere nearby, someone is serving ice, sweet, perfumed, and gloriously cold. Quick reality check. You probably won't survive this if you bring a modern beach cooler and think you've solved the desert. The sun will negotiate with your cooler, win in 5 minutes, and take your ice hostage. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake with us right now, tell me your location and local time in the comments so we can map this sleepy caravan by starlight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander out along the edge of a caravanserai courtyard, where the bricks give back the day's warmth in gentle sighs. Someone closes a wooden lattice, and the pattern it throws across the ground feels like a woven carpet of light. You can smell rosewater drifting from a kitchen, a perfume the desert can't refuse. The first thing you notice is how fast the air changes once the sun bows out. The heat lets go, reluctantly at first, then completely. This is how the story starts. Not with machines, not with electricity, but with the mercurial rhythm of a place where days scorch and nights shiver. A mainstream fact drifts into your ear like a teacher who deserves a nap. The Iranian plateau, cradling empires we call Achaemenid, Parthian, Sasanian, hosts some of the hottest and driest landscapes on Earth, including the Lut, where ground temperatures once measured so high that even the sun blushed. In other corners, snow nests in the Zagros and Alborz mountains. Because Persia is contrary like that. Two climates politely ignoring each other across a short camel ride. That contrast is the secret door you're going to slip through tonight. The door that lets a desert civilization invent coolness as a craft. You slow your breathing with the night. Around you, the buildings huddle low and thick, made of sun-dried bricks and coated in pale plaster to shrug off heat. Their flat roofs are less roofs and more evening lounges. Families bring up bedding, and you can picture yourself rolling out a simple mat to sleep in plain view of Cassiopeia. Quirky tidbit. In summer, people sometimes used roof sleeping as a nightly ritual. Imagine your neighbors nodding hello over the parapet, both of you pretending the stars are just forgetful light bulbs that take hours to dim. You sip water scooped from a clay jar, and it tastes cooler than it should. Evaporation doing its tiny magic like a shy stagehand who steals the show. You hear a soft creak and a splash. Somewhere, a water carrier tips a goatskin, and the beat of droplets against a basin fills the courtyard with an easy metronome. You can joke to yourself, very quietly because the moon is listening, that ancient Persia is the world's first lo-fi sleep playlist. Clay jar, gentle splash, distant flute, occasional camel commentary. Joke 1. The camel review is mixed. 2 stars, would not recommend the sand, but appreciates the dates. You grin to no one in particular and keep moving. What draws you forward is the paradox. How does ice exist here? In a place where your shadow practically sizzles at noon? You pass a boy balancing a tray of cups, each with a sprig of mint that stands upright like a tiny standard bearer. The cups are not steaming. They gleam with a chill that seems to have wandered in from a snowfield. You touch the outside of one cup, and your fingertips relish the micro-winter hiding there. That's the heart of this tale, how a culture reads landscape like a manual, then writes its own chapter in the margins. You take a left past a spice seller who waves a fan lazily, as if encouraging cinnamon to learn to fly. He's already set out little cones of saffron, each one a miniature sunrise. The scent is dense and honeyed, and it trips the memory of a sweet called faloodeh, thin rice noodles tangled in syrup, served cold with lime and rosewater. You're not at the recipe yet, not officially, but your palate is nosy, and your patience is historically weak. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions of Persian faloodeh belonged to an Achaemenid kitchen or arrived later through layers of culinary borrowing and tinkering. What matters right now is that the idea, ice kissed by perfume and citrus, hovers in the air as a promise. Your second joke arrives like a breeze pretending to be clever. If the desert had a thermostat, some ancient grandparent would have locked it at mild spring and hidden the key under a carpet. But the thermostat is cosmic and stubborn, so Persians learned to partner with physics instead. They built thick walls that hoard night cold and release it grudgingly in daylight. They understood that shadow isn't absence, it's a tool. They arranged courtyards so breezes can turn corners politely. Even your path tonight zigzags because straight lines are for arrows and impatience. Cooling prefers meanders. Lamps flicker. A vendor offers you a cup of sherbet, fruit syrup diluted with water, sometimes snow, sometimes not. And the surface shines like a tiny lake waiting for geese. You taste pomegranate first, then a whisper of sour lime, then the floral lift of rose. It's simple, but it feels ceremonial, as if the cup is a bell and the city listens when you sip. A mainstream fact to tuck behind your ear. Sherbet, sherbet, sorbet. These words are cousins. Traveling languages the way caravans travel roads. Proof that a sweet idea can outwalk empires. The vendor shrugs when you ask how the drink stays cool, the way magicians shrug when you already know you'll applaud. He nods toward the darkness beyond the wall where taller domes sleep. The answer lives there. Your third joke is selfish and small. You realize that if you lived here, you'd always volunteer to check on the ice, a job that suspiciously ends with you holding 2 cups. Somewhere beyond tonight's walks, you will find how snow slides from mountain to town, how domed structures, built of mud brick, straw, and secret geometry, sip heat away like it's tea gone cold, how underground veins of water stitch the desert to its own cool shadow. For now, you float in anticipation the way a basil seed floats in a summer drink. Another quirky tidbit, by the way. Basil seeds bloom into slippery, speckled orbs that look like little constellations in a glass. They turn basic syrup into a galaxy you can swallow. Listen to how the city breathes. In the center, an old sycamore leans over a communal pool, and the wind combs its leaves with a patient hand. The pool is not just decoration. It's a night mirror that invites heat to leave, to go admire the moon elsewhere. You sit on the low rim and feel your pulse settle with the ripples. You're not simply a tourist, you're an apprentice to temperature, learning the choreographies of shade and water and time. When morning arrives, the same pool will sparkle, but you'll prefer this hour, when the air is almost crisp, when impossibility, ice in a desert, turns plausible because the night says so. Historians still argue whether is a phrase you'll hear often tonight. Whether the first purpose-built ice houses in Iran were truly Achaemenid innovations, or matured later under Parthians, or Sasanians. Whether the recipes traveled outward first or inward from neighbors. Whether the word roots tell a story of invention or adoption. Debates meander like alleys, but your feet keep you in the present tense street, where a boy's breath puffs small fogs and vanishes, and that's proof enough that cold can live here. You stand, smooth your clothes, and let yourself feel faintly smug that you've joined a lineage of midnight walkers in a hot land who know where the cool hides. The secret is not a single trick, it's a symphony directed by the environment. Altitude lending its chill, night radiance stealing heat back into the stars. Adobe behaving like a camel for temperature, slow to anger, slow to forgive. The city carries these rules the way a baker carries a recipe in muscle memory. Not written, but remembered with the hands. You head toward that sleeping dome beyond the wall, not yet ready to lift the curtain on its quiet genius. Only ready to acknowledge that the miracle of a frozen dessert in a furnace country starts with respect. Respect for mountains, for wind, for the way water loves darkness. You move like a whisper, like condensation forming on a clay jar, and the night opens the way. You leave the lanterned courtyard before dawn, when the sky is a deep indigo bowl and the city holds its breath. The road out of town tastes faintly of dust and fennel, as you pass fields that have gone gray with night. Ahead, the horizon is a serrated line, the Zagros in the west, the Alborz in the north. Mountains that wear winter like a quiet crown, even while the plains burn. You join a small caravan, where men speak in low voices. Camels kneel like patient sofas, and the cargo frames are already padded with straw and felt. The plan is simple and a little audacious. Climb toward the snow, borrow a portion of the mountain's cold, and bring it back before the sun remembers to be bossy. A mainstream fact anchors your steps. Temperature falls as altitude rises, roughly 6 or 7 degrees Celsius per 1,000 meters. So those high shoulders of rock and juniper make their own weather, while the valleys simmer. That's why you can see your breath here at the pass, while the city below still smells like baked brick. The men call the cargo barf, snow, and chuckle at your face the first time you hear it. You quickly learn that in Persian, the word is wonderfully innocent. Your first joke of the morning arrives like a yawn. If this were your language class, barf, please, would be the one phrase you'd most carefully pronounce. You move in single file, following the goat path logic of the slope. On the north-facing side, the snow lingers longer, tucked into couloirs and bowls where the sun only visits on holidays. The collectors carry flat shovels with edges reinforced by hammered bronze, and they work with a rhythm that suggests they've done this since they were tall enough to argue with their fathers. They stamp the snow into wicker molds, layering straw between. Then they wrap the blocks with felted goat hair that resists wind and sheds meltwater. Quirky tidbit: goat hair felt actually tightens when damp, making it a surprisingly good insulator, as if the mountain tailored a coat for the cold itself. Above you, the great cone of a distant peak, maybe even Damavand if you've gone far enough north, wears a white turban. You imagine it as an aloof shopkeeper who will sell you cold by the cubit and refuses to haggle. The men whistle at the camels, who rise with their usual opera of complaints. Slatted wooden panniers, lined with reeds, allow meltwater to escape, so the precious cargo doesn't soak its own insulation. The drops patter onto the camel's flanks. Your second joke is a soft whisper. Spa day for the herd, complimentary mountain facial, tips and dates appreciated. Time here is measured in shade. You wait for a cloud to slide across the sun and then move the next load into it, as if shade were a booth at the market and you've bought 10 minutes of cool. The route includes small staging huts of stone, half buried like cautious tortoises. Inside, the air is steady and slow. You can hear the mountain thinking. The logic is relay. Carry, stage, trading speed for certainty that enough snow will arrive at the town's ice pit with dignity intact. Somewhere between two curves of the trail you find a marker stone carved with something formal and old, a memory of the imperial habit of organizing roads and passes. You can almost feel the ghost of the royal road in your calves, that ancient artery of Achaemenid governance that stitched satrapies together. If you could listen hard enough, you'd hear couriers still galloping by. Historians still argue whether these mountain-to-market snow caravans were already standardized under the early empires, or whether the real professionalization came later, when urban populations swelled under Safavid and Qajar courts, and summer demand for Sherbet boomed. Some sources praise winter river ice harvested into pits near towns. Others hint that highland snow was a seasonal luxury run by mountaineers who preferred their pay in copper coins and stories. You don't settle the debate. You just feel the weight of the snow when you help lift a block, the way it sighs, as if remembering the cloud it used to be. On descents, you learn the art of unhurried hurry. The sun clears a ridge and immediately acts like a supervisor who does surprise inspections. The caravan leader adjusts the route to skirt pale, reflective dolomite and duck into a spruce-lined ravine that still breathes last night's chill. He's learned the terrain the same way your tongue learned rosewater, by repetition. You practice walking with your hands open, palms cooling in the breeze, and your feet stop complaining. It's remarkable how much less the trail argues with you when you agree not to rush. There's an economy humming beneath the poetry. In the city, snow sellers will ladle slush into cups of sekenjabin, vinegar mint syrup, and into rose sherbets that take the desert's temper down 2 notches. Physicians will recommend snow-chilled drinks to balance overheated humors. with stern notes about moderation that nobody obeys in July. Families will chip a little barf into a jug of Duke, the salted yogurt drink, and everything will be suddenly more bearable. Joke 3 drifts by on a vagrant pine smell. If you had a loyalty card, the mountain would stamp it with a pine cone and a wink. At a mid-morning halt, you crouch behind a boulder and watch a pair of men crush fresh snow into a box-shaped hole they've dug in the drift. They layer it with straw and tramp it flat, chanting under their breath. The block they produce looks like a modest cake, the kind you'd bring to a quiet party hosted by winter. In the valley, that block, given time and pressure in a deep, plaster-lined pit, will harden into ice, leaner and more obedient than its fluffy cousin. The pits, called yakhchals when capped with domes or simply qanats when left low and covered, are waiting like sleeping whales just beyond the city wall. You can almost see them, their conical shoulders rising from the soil, their stairways spiraling down into a darkness that smells like damp straw and snow lint. Every so often, the trail crosses a rivulet. Someone kneels with a skin and tops it off, and when they drink, they pass the mouth to you. The water tastes mineral and quick, and for a moment your thoughts clear so completely that you can hear the scratching of an owl in the cedar above. Then a pebble in your sandal reminds you that you are, in fact, a domesticated human with opinions about socks. The caravan moves again, and so do you. In town, there will be a choreography of unloading. The felt wraps will be peeled back, hung to dry in the shade. The straw will be saved for next time or spread on garden beds where it will brag about its mountain adventure to unimpressed cucumbers. The snow will be slid into the pit by ramps cut into the side, tamped, watered lightly, layered, and sealed with reed mats and clay lids against the day. The melt that escapes across the floor will find its way into a drain that points toward a qanat, because nothing here is wasted if a channel can be coaxed to carry it. On the way down, you pass a group coming up late, and the leader jokes that they're special delivery, which you translate as, "We overslept." You offer them a handful of raisins and continue, grateful that your crew's habit is to move by starlight. Ancient express shipping has no parchment labels, but the urgency is written in sweat, in the procession of shadows slipping across rock, in the slosh of water that must not slosh too much. At last, the roofs appear, white blots of lime wash in the shimmer, and the air grows thicker, warmer, less mountain, and more market. The caravan's voices loosen. Someone hums a tune that you can't place but feels like the chorus to a story you already know. You touch the felt one more time, firmer now that it's damp, and think about how many materials here do double duty. Felt as clothing and insulation, straw as bedding and armor for snow, a mountain as a freezer and a guidebook. If the desert is a teacher, the lesson is that nothing is only one thing. You step through the city gate in a ribbon of shade and aim for the domed shapes beyond the gardens. The yakhchals are waiting, asleep but listening, ready to swallow the barf and exhale it, months later, as a luxury that somehow feels like a right. You wipe grit from your tongue and taste a phantom of mint, the promise of a cup that will clink with fragments of high country. The day is heating quickly, as if offended by your success, but you've already borrowed enough night to share. The domes rise out of the soil like patient whales surfacing at dawn, ribs of mud brick catching the first light, skin the color of toasted sesame. You walk toward one along a path packed hard by centuries of careful feet. Up close, the yakhchal isn't cute or small. It's monumental in the quiet way granaries are monumental, built not to impress, but to keep promises. The entrance is a low north-facing doorway, modest as a wink. It forces you to bow, a polite ritual in which you tell the cold, "I mean well." Step inside, and the air changes music. Outside, heat is a drumline. In here, the temperature hums like a low flute. Your skin tingles with surprise at how quickly the room edits the day. The interior is a tall, inverted bowl with a shaft of dim light filtering from a small opening near the crown. Stairs hug the wall and spiral downward to a floor sunk well below ground level, where a broad pit, half room, half well, waits, lined smooth as a ceramic bowl. If you listen carefully, you can hear a drop fall into a narrow channel and decide which underground path to take. The place smells faintly of wet clay and straw and that crisp, almost minty note that all clean cold seems to share. Here's your anchor of fact. A yakhchal, literally a ice pit, is a traditional Persian ice house, a domed, partly subterranean structure used for making and storing ice and for keeping foods cool through blistering summers. Many still stand in central Iran. Yazd, Maybod, Kerman, mute but eloquent, their geometry intact, their purpose obvious the instant you step inside. The walls are astonishingly thick, sometimes 2 meters or more, a cathedral of thermal mass. They're made of mud brick, bound and plastered with a special mortar, sarouj, a mixture of clay, sand, lime, ash, and often fibrous hair. You run your fingers along the inner curve and feel how it's been troweled to a finish that's almost eager to shed water. Quirky tidbit while you're petting architecture. Some recipes for sarouj call for egg whites whipped into the mix as if the builders were making a giant omelet for a very fussy wall. Others used goat or camel hair like ancient rebar, giving the plaster a bit of tensile grit. Whether the egg story is practical chemistry or building site folklore, the yakhchal's skin is indeed stubbornly water-resistant, the better to keep the hoard from melting into mud. You descend the steps and the dome swallows sound. Layers of last winter's ice, remember the straw sandwich blocks you watched come down from the pass, have fused into a solid mass along the pit's curve, where workers carved tunnels and caverns like pastry chefs shaping a cold cake. At intervals, reed mats lie ready, gentle separators to keep one layer from kissing the next too tightly. Narrow vents near the apex of the dome make the warmest air wander up and out, a thermal chimney that's eternally curious about the sky. The door you ducked through is kept small and mostly shut. Every time it opens, the building sighs and rearranges itself, but its habits are strong. You sit on a step and let your body learn what the building already knows. That coolness isn't only a temperature, it's choreography. The dome's shape pushes rising air into a slow spin. The thick walls soak up daytime heat like camels soaking up water, giving it back so sluggishly that the sun gets bored and leaves. At night, the exterior radiates its stored heat to the stars, those same stars that froze shallow pools outside. So the skin of the yakhchal starts the next day already biased toward chill. Joke 1 tiptoes in. It's basically a rent-controlled apartment for cold. The lease is ironclad, and the landlord is physics. You picture the full seasonal ballet. In winter and the shoulder seasons, shallow basins outside the dome, long rectangular pools lined with clay, are flooded at dusk with a thin sheet of water. High walls flank the basins on the south, throwing deep shadow across the surface so it loses heat to the night sky. Even a few degrees below freezing is enough when the water is thin as a window pane. By dawn, the sheet has become brittle glass. Workers crack and stack it, ferrying the panes inside to layer over straw like librarians filing books. In summer, the mountain snow you helped collect arrives to top off the pile, and the yakhchal becomes a bank vault with 2 currencies, night-earned ice and highland barf, both insured by shade. Historians still argue whether the domes were primarily designed for radiative cooling, those star-facing vents acting like cosmic refrigerators, or whether their shape is largely structural, with the real cooling owed to thermal mass and careful airflow. They also debate how widespread the practice of on-site ice-making was versus relying on snow caravans alone, and which periods emphasized storage over production. What's obvious to your cheeks is that the building turns time into insulation. Every hour is a tool, not an enemy. Look down at the floor and you'll notice the gentle slope toward a narrow drain. Meltwater has a job. Idle water breeds mischief. Channels lead this runoff toward gardens, or, when the site allows, toward a nearby underground aqueduct, so the cold trickle contributes to the neighborhood's quiet economy. You can't help smiling at the efficiency. Nothing in this system is a single-use guest. Joke 2 rolls in like a cool pebble. If the yakhchal had a motto, it would read, "No melt left behind." The craft extends to orientation. Builders prefer a northern exposure for the main door to dodge direct sun, and they often situate the dome where prevailing winds can be caught and tamed, sometimes with a windcatcher tower attached or adjacent to encourage a lazy draft. The dome's outer surface is often ribbed or stepped, partly for construction and partly for maintenance. A worker can climb to repair plaster without inventing new swear words. The whole thing looks like an inverted ice cream cone, which is a little on the nose for a building that dreams of faloodeh, but the cone does what cones do best. It holds a scoop safely. Down in the pit, you run your palm over an ice face and feel the subtle texture from last season's tamping. Straw peaks like blonde confetti. Tools lean in their places. Wooden paddles, short-handled picks, a bronze scoop with the scars of 1,000 clinks. You imagine summer mornings when a boy is sent down with a lamp to chip a ration for the Sherbet seller, measuring the chunks by habit. A fistful for a cup, a forearm's length for a party, 2 forearms if someone wants to wrestle the heat into politeness. The ice answers each strike with that special ringing sound, the bell of a season captured in mineral and time. Here's the second fact you can tuck away like a cold grape on the tongue. Some yakhchals in desert-edge towns stand more than 10 meters tall, with volumes large enough to store ice for entire neighborhoods. Their capacity turns luxury into routine. Iced medicine for fevers, chilled dairy that doesn't curdle in a sigh, sherbets for ceremonies, even storage of perishable foods behind reed partitions at the pit's lip. The building is a public amenity disguised as sculpture. Before you climb out, you spot a painted mark on the inner wall, a neat line with a date in old script. It's a memory of a year when the ice reached that high, a proud scar. Another mark sits lower, annotated with something teasing, perhaps the short winter. Quirky tidbit number 2, whispered by a mason in your imagination. Some crews would embed a small charm, blue beads, a knot of hair, near the doorframe against the evil eye, not for the people but for the ice. Ridiculous. Maybe. Effective. The ice seems unbothered. You emerge into daylight blinking, a little reluctant, like a cat leaving a cool tile floor. The dome's shadow drapes across the yard, and you realize it's an active participant, sweeping each day to shelter the basins and the men who attend them. Beyond the wall, you can hear the city's ordinary heat gearing up, pots clanking, donkeys negotiating terms. Inside the yakhchal, nothing hurries. Joke 3 stretches and yawns. If patience were a building, this would be its summer house. You brush dust from your hands and take one last look at the small crown vent, the oculus where warm air forgets to stay, and promise yourself you'll remember this shape when you next face a stubborn afternoon. The genius here isn't a single invention. It's a conversation with physics spoken in clay and time, a grammar of shade and mass and sky. You step away softly so the cold can go back to sleeping, banked and dreamless, keeping its ancient appointment with a cup that will clink later under rose-scented syrup. You follow the meltwater's whisper past the yakhchal wall until it ducks into a grated opening, the air there cool enough to raise polite goosebumps on your forearms. Kneel, and you hear it more clearly. Water moving in a corridor it refuses to brag about. An introvert of a river, shy and constant. You lift the grate and look down into a shaft cut like a straw through earth, stone-ringed, rope-burnished, with a ladder that insists on caution. The city above heats up with the day, but you descend into a temperature that prefers yesterday. Down here lives the reason the yakhchal never runs out of patience. The qanat. You set a palm on the shaft wall and feel a faint breeze coming up, like the earth is exhaling from a long expository paragraph. A qanat is simple to describe and astonishing to pull off. A gently sloping underground tunnel that taps a hillside aquifer at its mother well, then carries cold water across miles to town using only gravity and stubborn optimism. Along its length, vertical shafts like the one you're visiting puncture the surface at regular intervals. Breathing holes, work portals, a dotted line across the landscape that maps effort into geometry. Mainstream fact to tuck behind your ear. Iran alone has recorded tens of thousands of these systems, and many still run. The Persian qanat as a heritage ensemble even made UNESCO's list. A bureaucratic way of saying, this is genius carved in dirt. You shoulder your way along a maintenance ledge and step into a side chamber where the ceiling hunches low. The tunnel is just tall enough for an experienced digger to move with a crouched grace, and just wide enough to make you aware of your elbows. Slate lamps once burned here, their smoke tracing the air's path like a finger. The floor bears the miniature dunes of silt that time creates when no one scolds it. The water itself slides past your ankles like silk that forgot how to wrinkle. It's cold in that purposeful way that reminds you of pre-dawn mountain breaths, because that is, in essence, what you're feeling. The mountains sigh rerouted under your city. The slope, this is crucial, drops only a little over long distances, sometimes a meter or two per kilometer, just enough to keep the flow eager, but not eager enough to erode its own road. Too steep, and the tunnel scours. Too flat, and it sulks. Qanat master builders, the Mokanis, learn to read the land with their feet and their foreheads. Quirky tidbit. Some Mokanis carried lit oil lamps not for light, but as oxygen meters. If the flame stumbled, so did they. Others swore by a humble trick, holding a damp feather to feel the draft direction. And at least one delighted in tapping rhythms on the wall so his team, spaced up the shafts, could listen to the gradient like musicians tuning a long invisible instrument. A narrow doorway opens into a sardab, a subterranean summer room that borrows the qanat's cool, like a neighbor borrowing sugar. You step into it and feel your skin settle. Jars line the wall, their clay bellies dark with condensation. A lattice frames small, greenish light. A bench invites naps you pretend to resist. Windcatchers, badgers, can be rigged above to pull air down across the water, then sweep it out, making the room a chilled lung. People store melon here, grapes, jars of yogurt that sigh in relief. A yakhchal may be the palace of cold, but the qanat is the quiet civil service, showing up every day, refusing drama. Joke 1 pads and wearing slippers. It's like the city's air conditioning agreed to work nights and refused a salary, provided you promise never to block the vents with laundry. You keep walking, letting your fingers trail the wall where the plaster's been patched. Here's the city's true miracle. All this chill and flow arrive with no roaring engine. It's gravity, a polite gradient, and the insulation of Earth. You pass another access shaft and pause to look up. Sunlight pours down as a narrow coin, and if you squint you can see a circle of blue the size of a small plate. It's a skylight for moles, for the Mokanis who wriggled through, measuring and clearing, fixing collapses after an earthquake, blessing new branches that would feed a neighborhood's baths and gardens, and yes, the basins by the yakhchal, where winter water becomes summer ice. Historians still argue whether the first qanats began in the northwest plateau under early Iranian polities, spread by Achaemenid administrators who loved a good infrastructure project, or whether similar systems blossomed independently in places like Oman and the Levant, and later converged into what we recognize here. The dating games get thorny, water leaves little pottery to gossip about, but what you can feel is the coherence, a design so sensible that multiple landscapes might have taught it to their people like a shared hymn. You pause at a bend where the tunnel widens into a settling basin. Stones are stacked like a small dam, slowing the flow enough for silt to drop out. From there, a branch line peels away toward the marketplace and a public cistern, while the main channel continues to neighborhoods that consider this stream a member of the family. Above ground, the shafts appear as a neat string of mounds, ant hills the size of wagons, marching across plain and foothill. They're navigation marks for shepherds and memory palaces for farmers who recite the names Mother Well, Long Drop, Goat's Luck, Split Stone, Little Echo. Joke 2 pops like a bubble. If streets here have addresses, the qanat has constellation names, and your mailman can find 3 shafts past the fig tree, turn at the snoring dog. You enter a section where the roof is reinforced with willow and tamarisk lattices, proof that the soil here has opinions about staying where it should. The Mokanis would listen for the sound of the pick echoing differently, a warning of pockets and fault lines, and they'd brace accordingly. There's grit and danger in this craft. More than one tunnel maker could list the Earth's moods on a chalkboard of scars. The prestige is real too. In cities like Yazd, the men responsible for keeping the qanats healthy had social standing that hovered between engineer, priest, and magician. They brought water in a land that measures life in drops. Back in the Sardab, you cup water to your lips and taste minerals sucked from limestone and baked clays. It's colder than the air, and your tongue brightens. Mainstream fact number 2. Softer than a footstep. The qanat doesn't just cool, it democratizes water across seasons. As long as the mother well sits above the city's level, and the aquifer is refreshed by mountain snowmelt, the flow persists straight through months when the sky gives nothing. That persistence is what lets the yakhchal plan a long summer, what lets fruit sellers promise chilled grapes in a courtyard where even the cats have moved into the shade. You feel a faint vibration and realize you're near a junction where a sluice gate, just a carved plank pinned in place, allows caretakers to shift supply. On feast days or during drought, these gates are the city's pulse points. Arguments happen here, of course they do. Water carries both diplomacy and volume. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some towns held annual ceremonies when a new qanat arrived, treating it like a newborn, naming it, baking bread in its honor, and scheduling maintenance days that doubled as picnics. Work parties with melons cooling in the current and gossip drifting like reeds. The tunnel climbs so gradually that your calves notice before your eyes do. That's the other genius. By staying underground, the water avoids evaporation, and by taking a nonchalant gradient, it doesn't rush to ruin itself. When it surfaces at the public cistern, an ambar with a stout dome and stairways that descend into coolness, it does so shyly. You'll visit one later, feel the old brick cool your back, and hear your voice come back calmer. For now, you stand where a side pipe, barely thicker than your wrist, heads toward the yakhchal's yard. It's like spotting a quiet alley that leads straight to your favorite bakery. Joke 3 waves from that alley with a ladle. The qanat is the city's room service, delivering tall glasses of without knocking. On your way out, you pass a niche blackened by countless lamps. Someone has scratched a fish shape there. Another hand drew a star. People mark water with symbols. They always have. You put your palm to the wall one last time and feel how the heat of your body soaks into the clay and fades, claimed by the larger climate of stone. When you climb back into the light, the domes of the yakhchal glow again, and you can see now how the system completes itself. Mountains lend cold, nights gift ice, domes hoard it, and beneath it all, the qanat threads the city to its own hidden winter, steady as a heartbeat the sun can't scold. You emerge from the cool hush of the qanat, blinking against the sunlight, and the city is already stirring with appetites. Somewhere close, you hear the clink of cups, the scrape of a ladle against clay, and the brief fizz of laughter as someone tastes something sweeter than the day deserves. Follow the sound, and you find a stall with a painted awning, a line of jars glowing amber, ruby, emerald. This is where the mountain's snow and the desert's orchards agree to collaborate. The stall of the Sherbet maker, a conjurer who mixes syrups with ice until the desert forgets its temper. You lean in as he works. A block of yak, fresh from the pit, is shaved with a bronze scraper, each curl falling into a clay basin that frosts around the rim. The ice is nothing glamorous, shards, slush, a frozen sigh, but when he pours syrup over it, the basin becomes a small stage where flavors perform. Rosewater first, with a hue that seems colorless until you smell it. Suddenly pink floods your imagination. Then pomegranate, deep and jewel-like, tasting of both tartness and patience. Quirky tidbit. Some recipes even called for sour cherry, quince, or grape molasses, depending on what was sulking in the orchards that year. The drink is not always sweet either. Sometimes vinegar syrups like Second Jobin join the show, giving your tongue a playful slap before the ice soothes it. Here's the mainstream fact to anchor the moment. The Persian Sherbet tradition is ancient and resilient, reaching back at least to Achaemenid days and persisting through Islamic courts, Safavid banquets, Qajar picnics, and even modern Ramadan iftars. The word itself, Sherbet, Sherbet, sorbet, wandered across languages like a tipsy traveler, spilling into Arabic, Turkish, Italian, French, and eventually English. The family resemblance is clear in every sip. The Sherbet maker sprinkles in basil seeds, which bloom into slippery galaxies, black dots swimming in translucent halos. Children giggle at the texture. Adults claim it aids digestion. Historians still argue whether basil seeds were medicinal garnish or playful decoration. Whether the seeds were meant to balance hot-tempered foods in humoral theory or just to give people something to chew absent-mindedly while gossiping. You don't care. Your tongue delights in the crunch gel duality, like chewing a tiny universe. Joke 1 sidles up, sticky-fingered. If bubble tea had an ancient Persian cousin, this would be it. Basil seeds bobbing like shy tapioca, except with fewer trendy straws and more donkeys staring. A boy brings his father a cup of faloodeh, the sherbet's even fancier sibling. Thin rice noodles tangled in rosewater syrup, topped with lime juice squeezed from fruit dark as jade. The noodles were pre-cooked and frozen into the slush, brittle until they melt on your tongue like snowy threads. It's a strange texture the first time, like slurping a silk scarf. But the coolness forgives all awkwardness. You watch as the father sighs with relief, wiping his brow and laughing at nothing in particular. Because cold dessert in desert heat is a punchline all by itself. You sip your own sherbet and feel your mouth bloom. Your lips chill, your teeth ache in a pleasant warning, and suddenly the dusty heat of the street is a backdrop, not a burden. Around you, the small crowd leans on benches or crouches in shade, sharing cups, trading spoons, telling stories that melt slower than the ice. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some medieval sherbet recipes included herbs like thyme, or even fenugreek, a flavor that probably made children suspicious and adults insist, it's good for you. One court physician supposedly recommended carrot sherbet as a mood booster, though whether he meant for kings or camels is unclear. The stall owner keeps the syrups in glass jars stoppered with wax. He pours with a flourish, each cup a minor ceremony. The line of customers includes a trader with cinnamon on his sleeves, a woman with henna-stained palms, and a traveler who clutches his cup as if it were proof that paradise was not only promised, but portable. Joke 2 rolls in like a cube of ice. Sherbet is the one drink where everyone agrees on the garnish, but nobody agrees on the correct number of gulps. 3, 5, or as many as the ice allows before it sulks into water. The craft is social as well as culinary. Servants carry trays of sherbet to courtyards, where guests recline on carpets while fountains giggle in the background. Poets compare the drink to moonlight dissolving in the throat. Musicians sing of lovers offering sherbet as if sweetness could be a proposal. Somewhere in this swirl of imagery, the drink becomes not only refreshment, but metaphor. Coldness that heals, sweetness that persuades, clarity that forgives. Mainstream fact number 2. By the time of the Abbasid Caliphate, Persian sherbet recipes had entered Arabic cookbooks and spread to Baghdad, Cairo, and beyond, carried by scribes and cooks who treated sugar, rosewater, and ice as diplomatic gifts. Historians still argue whether the Arab world adopted the full icy version or mostly the syrup concentrate, since not every climate had yakhchals to spare. What is certain is that the habit of mixing fruit syrups with cold water, sometimes with ice when available, became a cross-cultural delight long before Europeans puzzled out the trick. You drain your cup, and your lips linger on the last frozen shard like a farewell kiss. The sherbet maker nods, satisfied, and immediately begins shaving another basin of ice. His arms move with the steady rhythm of someone who has made a life of resisting the sun. The stall smells like rose and lime, the sound like trickling laughter. Joke 3 comes with a grin. Somewhere in the city, a nobleman is paying 10 times the price for the same drink on a golden tray, and yet here, at a street stall, you're convinced you've already stolen royalty's secret. When you step away, the air feels hotter by contrast, but you carry a small winter inside you now. The sherbet has done its job, convincing you that the desert is manageable, even kind. Behind you, the stall's awning flaps lazily, guarding the jars of syrup like a polite dragon. Ahead, the day promises heat, but you promise yourself another cup later, maybe with saffron or sour cherry. In the desert, cold is never permanent, but its memory is, and that memory is enough to keep you walking. The sherbet stall fades behind you, but the taste still lingers, and you follow the crowd toward a garden where the city's nobility are gathering for a summer banquet. Courtyard walls rise high and pale, their surfaces reflecting light like stubborn mirrors. But within those walls lies a green miracle: shade, fountains, and the promise of chilled delights. This is where Persia's elite make their relationship with ice public, turning a simple drink into a social performance. You step through an archway into a garden laid out in the Chaharbagh style, a quadripartite paradise of stone paths, flowing channels, and geometric flower beds. Cypress trees stand stiff and stately, as if they've been rehearsing for centuries. Carpets are rolled out on platforms shaded by silk canopies, and servants in linen tunics glide among cushions, balancing trays. The air is perfumed with jasmine, smoke from roasting lamb, and, most importantly, the faint mineral scent of ice. A mainstream fact glides into your ear. In the Persianate world, especially during Safavid and Qajar times, royal and noble courts hosted elaborate summer feasts where sherbets, faloodeh, and other chilled dishes played a starring role. Ice wasn't just refreshment, it was spectacle. To hand your guest a cup frosted with mountain snow was to remind them that you commanded not just armies, but seasons. At one corner, a servant arrives with a large ceramic bowl filled with slushy ice, tinted golden with saffron syrup. He ladles it into small cups, and the guests murmur approval. Saffron threads glimmer faintly in the sunlight like trapped flames. A boy sprinkles pistachio crumbs on top, green flecks that crunch between teeth, a little luxury made literal. Quirky tidbit: saffron ice was thought to invigorate the spirit, and in some recipes, physicians recommended it for melancholy. You picture a melancholy noble sulking into a saffron slush, and feel the absurdity melt away. Joke 1 joins the scene with a bow. It's the only banquet where you can say this dish was frozen last January and everyone applauds instead of raising eyebrows. The banquet flows like the water channels around it. Courtiers trade poems, pluck lutes, and adjust turbans with theatrical sighs. Ice, meanwhile, keeps arriving in forms both humble and inventive. There's dough, the salty yogurt drink, cooled with slivers of ice so that the mint sprigs bob like rafts. There are trays of melon slices, chilled in a sardab cellar until they drip with cold dew. And then, most dramatic, comes a silver bowl filled with faloodeh noodles coiled in icy syrup, topped with a squeeze of lime and a drizzle of sour cherry. The guests lean in, because even jaded nobles are children again when something cold surprises them in the desert. You sip your own cup and feel the temperature argue with the day. The sun presses down like a tax collector. The sherbet presses back like a lawyer who knows the loopholes. You smile because you know which side will win this hour. Historians still argue whether these feasts were meant mainly as genuine pleasure or as political theater, demonstrating the host's ability to marshal resources and command comfort against nature itself. Perhaps both. After all, when a king could serve ice in July, he was signaling more than hospitality. He was saying, "I control what the sun cannot." Servants carry brass trays heavy with goblets. Each goblet sweats until it drips, and the moisture is caught on napkins embroidered with verses about paradise. Poets recite lines comparing chilled sherbet to the breath of dawn on a lover's lips, or the moon distilled into a cup. You're tempted to roll your eyes, but the drink really does deserve poetry. Joke 2 sneaks onto a cushion beside you. Imagine being the poor court musician whose job is to compose a whole ode about frozen noodles. What rhymes with slush in Persian, anyway? The banquet continues into afternoon. A storyteller reclines against a pillow, weaving tales of past kings who ordered ice houses bigger than mosques. Children chase each other with cups half full of melting ice, shrieking in mock terror, as if the cold were chasing them. Somewhere, a bored noble flicks an ice chip onto a rival's robe. The rival yelps, then laughs, because what else can you do when cold ambushes you in July? Mainstream fact number 2. By the Safavid era, the city of Isfahan alone had multiple yakhchals supporting its palaces, and records note that ice and sherbets were considered essential for royal hospitality. Guests from abroad, whether merchants or ambassadors, remarked on the abundance of chilled drinks in a climate that seemed to forbid them. Historians still argue whether Persia or Mughal India perfected the more extravagant sherbet culture, but each court took pride in showing visitors that their summers had loopholes. As shadows lengthen, music softens. The heat retreats a little, satisfied that it has argued enough for the day. Servants collect empty bowls and clink spoons into basins of melting ice. The nobles lean back, belching politely, praising the poetry of their companions, and pretending they're not already planning which Sherbet they'll request tomorrow. The garden glows gold in the lowering sun, its channels glistening like veins of quicksilver. You stand at the edge of the banquet, still holding the taste of saffron ice on your tongue. The nobles may think it is their wealth that cools them, but you know better. The mountain, the yakhchal, the qanat, the patient hands of workers, they are the real guests of honor here. Silent and invisible, but indispensable. Joke 3 stretches beside you, lazy as a cat. Every banquet has an uninvited guest, and here it's physics, lounging in the corner, smugly sipping rosewater on the house. When the feast finally dissolves into dusk, lanterns are lit, and the coolness of night returns to join the sherbets. You leave the garden with the music fading behind you, the image of saffron-stained ice glowing faintly in your imagination. Outside the walls, common folk wait for their own turn to taste winter in summer. The nobles may use ice for prestige, but for the city as a whole, the story is only beginning. The nobles drift back to their palaces, their servants balancing trays of empty cups like trophies. But the streets are still busy. Lamps flicker above doorways, and the smell of fried dough clings to the evening. You follow the murmur of the bazaar, where common folk gather for their own version of refreshment. The ice here is less gilded, less poetic, but no less magical. If the banquet was theater, this is street comedy. Quick, noisy, improvised, and full of charm. At a stall shaded by a patched awning, a man shaves ice from a block stored in straw. His tool is blunt but steady, his motions practiced. He tosses the slush into clay cups, splashes syrup from a jug that looks older than the stall itself, and slides the cups to waiting hands without ceremony. Children shout orders with the authority of kings. A girl insists on double rosewater. Her brother demands sour vinegar with mint, the kind that puckers your lips until you resemble a startled carp. Joke 1 grins like a fishmonger. Second Jobin is basically the desert's sour candy soda, proof that Persians invented the pucker face centuries before Instagram filters. Here's the mainstream fact. Records from medieval Persian towns note that ice wasn't reserved solely for the elite. Seasonal markets sold it in small quantities, chipped from communal yakhchals and rationed out at affordable prices, especially in larger cities like Isfahan, Shiraz, and Yazd. Ice sellers, bar forush, often hawked their wares with loud cries, competing for thirsty customers. They were sometimes taxed or regulated, since ice was a resource tied to city planning. You watch as a merchant, sweaty from unloading carpets, pays a copper coin for a chipped bowl of ice with grape molasses syrup. He drinks it in 3 gulps, sighs with a sound like fabric unrolling, and wipes his beard with his sleeve. No poetry, no ceremony, just pure gratitude. A woman nearby buys 2 cups of sherbet for her children and a sliver of ice to drop into her clay jug at home, where it will chill her family's supper of yogurt and cucumbers. Quirky tidbit. Some families even floated pieces of ice in milk, letting it clink softly like a lullaby for the evening meal. A boy runs past you with a basket of melons, bound for a cellar, cooled by qanat water. He brags to his friends that by nightfall they'll have slices served, as cold as mountain stone. The children laugh, and one swears he'll throw a piece at his sister's neck just to hear her squeal. Ice here is more than refreshment, it's play. Historians still argue whether ice distribution among commoners was widespread or limited mainly to urban centers, whether villages relied mostly on night-frozen basins rather than communal yakhchals. Some accounts suggest rural folk only tasted ice on festival days, while others describe bizarre ice stalls as everyday summer staples in major towns. What's clear, as you stand here, is that no matter the scale, the desire for cold sweetness trickled into every corner of Persian society. Joke 2 stumbles along, sticky-fingered. Somewhere out there, an ancestor of yours was scolded for eating ice too fast and inventing the first brain freeze in history. You notice how modest the servings are. A handful of slush in a cup, no more. It isn't stinginess, it's strategy. Too much ice at once melts too quickly, leaving a puddle of diluted syrup. Better to savor a small portion, let the cup sweat in your hand, take measured sips that last until the next coin is found. Ice is treated like saffron, precious, portioned, enough to brighten, but never to overwhelm. Nearby, a pair of storytellers set up on a carpet, their audience cross-legged and fanning themselves with scraps of palm. Between tales, they sip Sherbet, pausing dramatically to let the coolness punctuate the story. The crowd chuckles, not only at the jokes, but at the sight of ice being casually swallowed, as though the storyteller had trained dragons or stolen the moon. A mainstream fact number 2. Travelers from Europe and India often marveled at how ordinary Persians enjoyed iced drinks in bazaars, something rare in their own homelands at the time. Accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries mention stalls selling iced fruit waters to common customers, sometimes described with both admiration and suspicion, as though too much coldness in the hands of the masses might upset the natural order. The ice seller wipes his brow and rearranges the straw around the shrinking block. He hums a tune that rises above the chatter, and for a moment the whole lane seems to sway with it. Children slurp the last of their cups, lips tinted red from cherry syrup. A dog noses an abandoned shard of ice and jerks back, confused at the bite of cold. Joke 3 trots past, wagging its tail. Even the dogs in this town are learning about refrigeration the hard way. When the stall finally runs out, the crowd disperses without complaint. Everyone knows the cycle. Tonight, more water will freeze in shallow basins. Tomorrow, more blocks will be carved and carried. For now, bellies are cooled, tongues sweetened, spirits lifted. You walk away with a smile, thinking how even the humblest sip of Sherbet turns a hot day into a small victory. The nobles may have their gilded bowls and poetic odes, but in the bazaar, cold is democracy. 1 coin, 1 cup, 1 brief vacation from the sun. And somehow, that feels like the truest kind of luxury. The streets grow quieter as twilight presses its violet hand across the rooftops. But you know where to look for the next chapter in this tale of ice. Slip down a narrow lane, past bread ovens exhaling their last loaves of the day, and you find yourself at the threshold of a small neighborhood square. Here, lanterns glow softer, the air smells of clay pots cooling after the kiln, and voices carry in a more intimate register. This is not a royal garden, nor a bustling bazaar. This is where ordinary families sip their way through summer evenings, each one with a story woven around a chipped shard of ice. You lean against the wall, unnoticed, as a family of 5 spreads a mat across the packed earth. A jug of doog sits at the center, salted yogurt drink flecked with mint leaves. The father unwraps a small straw bundle with the care of someone presenting treasure. Inside, wrapped and damp, is a sliver of ice chipped from the communal yakhchal earlier that day. He drops it into the jug, and the children clap as if a magician has performed a trick. The sound of the clink is enough to make their eyes widen. Joke 1 nudges in. If you could bottle that sound, you'd outsell every ringtone in history. Mainstream fact to steady the scene. Ice was indeed rationed and sold in smaller portions for ordinary folk. Families often brought their own containers to purchase modest amounts, sometimes as a luxury for feast days, sometimes simply to make supper bearable. Documents from Safavid and Qajar periods note municipal oversight of ice distribution, ensuring at least some access for common households. You're handed a clay cup of the dough. The chill hits your teeth first, then the salt sings, then the mint wakes you up in a way the day never could. Around you, laughter drifts as neighbors share cucumbers dipped in yogurt, bread torn into ragged hunks, and the coolness of a single sliver stretched across 5 mouths. It isn't about quantity, it's about the shared pause. Children from another family run past holding slices of melon. They shriek when the juice runs down their wrists, then chase each other in circles, offering bites in exchange for promises of future favors. I'll share my sandals, you share your melon. One clever child has placed his slice on a chipped ice shard before eating, as though he has invented refrigeration by accident. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, children truly did place fruits or even boiled eggs against ice blocks to cool them, turning ordinary snacks into luxuries. Historians still argue whether this kind of access, neighborhood sharing of small ice bundles, was a norm across Persia, or only a feature of wealthier, more urbanized centers. In smaller villages, night-frozen basins might have been the mainstay. Yet travelers' notes and local oral histories suggest that even modest families in cities found ways to buy, borrow, or beg for a taste of winter. Nearby, an old woman sits cross-legged with a brass pan. She mixes sugar with ground almonds, rosewater, and a few precious ice chips. The mixture turns to a paste, then to a thickened drink she ladles into small bowls. The children crowd around, spoons flashing like impatient comets. Joke too ambles in, sticky with almond paste. Every grandmother invents the new dessert of the century, but this one might actually deserve the patent. Mainstream fact number 2. Almond-flavored icy drinks are recorded in some Persian recipe traditions, precursors to later sherbets that combined nuts, fruit, and ice. These concoctions weren't just treats, they were believed to strengthen the body's humors, balancing heat with coolness, dryness with moisture. Medicine and pleasure blurred easily in such recipes. As night deepens, more neighbors gather, each bringing a small contribution. A sprig of mint, a jug of syrup, a leftover wedge of snow stored under straw. Someone tells a story of the year when the yakhchals ice ran out early, and the whole quarter sighed in despair until the next mountain caravan arrived. Another recalls how a bride's dowry once included a promise of ice every summer, written into the contract like a love letter disguised as logistics. The conversations weave into a quilt, stitched by the soft sound of spoons scraping clay, the clink of ice in a jug, the occasional hiss of a lantern being adjusted. The children slow down, their play reduced to half-hearted chases, their fingers sticky with syrup. The old woman hums a lullaby as she wipes bowls clean. The moon hovers above the rooftops, pale and round, as though it, too, has been stored in a yakhchal for safekeeping. Joke 3 stretches out on the mat beside you. Forget gold or jewels. If you wanted to impress someone here, just show up with a basket of ice and you'll have more friends than you can count. You sip the last of your cup, melted now but still cool, and feel the day's heat wash away. It's clear that ice here is not only about comfort, it's about community. A sliver shared among 5 tastes sweeter than a bowl hoarded alone. You watch as neighbors roll up mats, exchange jars, promise each other tomorrow's gatherings. Ice has done its work, not just cooling bodies, but binding people together, giving them a nightly ritual to look forward to when the desert tries its best to bully them. When you finally rise to leave, the square is quieter, children yawning, parents folding cloths, lanterns dimming one by one. The night has reclaimed its coolness, but in every belly and every memory, a little bit of winter remains. The neighborhood square fades into silence behind you, but another kind of gathering stirs deeper in the city, the royal palace. Tonight, ice is not just refreshment or family ritual, it is theater, politics, and bragging rights wrapped in rosewater. You follow the torchlit procession into a vast courtyard where columns rise like petrified trees, and carpets stretch wide enough to make you nervous about stepping on the edges. At the center sits the king, a man who can command armies, mint coins, and, most impressively, serve snow in midsummer. A line of servants approaches carrying silver basins rimmed with frost, each basin draped with silks to show how precious its contents are. The guests lean forward with the eager politeness of people who know they will be mentioned in poetry later. The lids are lifted, and the crowd gasps, not at jewels, not at gold, but at ice, glittering as if the stars themselves have agreed to appear on the banquet table. Mainstream fact: Persian monarchs, from Achaemenid rulers to later Safavid shahs, often treated ice as a royal prerogative. Written accounts describe how kings showcased ice at feasts, especially for foreign envoys, to prove that their empire could bend nature to its will. Having sherbet served, chilled in the dead of summer, was more than comfort. It was political theater. The king's cup is filled first. Pomegranate syrup poured over crushed ice until it glows crimson. He raises it, lets the condensation run down his fingers, and drinks slowly, as if to say, "I have time, and I have winter." The court applauds. Joke 1 sidles in with a bow. When your main foreign policy flex is, "We chill better than you," you know you're winning. The guests are next. Ambassadors from distant lands murmur approval, but you notice the jealousy in their eyes. Their own cities may have wealth, temples, even libraries, but do they have ice in July? Not without struggling. This drink is more persuasive than any treaty. A quill will record the event later. The Shah served sherbet of snow, fragrant with rosewater, while we sat stunned like summer geese. The palace musicians play, lutes and flutes, weaving melodies as servers refill cups. A poet stands and delivers verses likening the king's generosity to snow falling on the plain, coolness flowing where once there was only thirst. Quirky tidbit. In some poems, sherbet was used as a metaphor for justice, sweet, refreshing, and impossible without a wise ruler. You smirk, wondering if the king had a hand in encouraging that metaphor. Historians still argue whether ice was truly rationed with royal control in all eras, or whether the symbolism grew stronger in later centuries. Some suggest kings monopolized the largest yakhchals and mountain caravans, while others believe local communities always retained access, with the crown mainly amplifying the spectacle when politics required. Either way, tonight it is clear that ice has become currency, measured not just in blocks, but in loyalty, awe, and carefully recorded gratitude. A servant brings forward an elaborate confection, layers of shaved ice, dyed with saffron and pistachio, arranged in stripes like a frozen carpet. The courtiers gasp again, though you suspect they're mostly practicing their gasps. Joke 2 slips under the table. If this banquet were a modern cooking show, half the contestants would be eliminated just trying to keep the ice from melting. Mainstream fact number 2. Records from the Mughal and Ottoman courts, both influenced by Persian traditions, show that rulers competed to serve the coldest, sweetest drinks, sometimes importing ice from far-off mountains. In this context, Persia's long-standing mastery of yakhchals gave its kings bragging rights that were hard to match. The king leans back on cushions, pleased, as servants fan the air. He gestures, and a child dancer enters, spinning while balancing a silver cup of sherbet on her head. The guests clap. The king smiles faintly. Somewhere in the background, laborers wait with more blocks of ice, sweating in silence, anonymous but vital. You can't help but notice them, and you know the king notices too, but not enough to share the poetry. Joke 3 tips its crown. Every empire has secret workers, but here it's the men who shovel snow at midnight who keep the king's cup cold at noon. If anyone deserves applause, it's them. The feast stretches late. Stars scatter across the sky and the torches burn low, but the ice remains the evening's true guest of honor. You sip one last cup, letting the chill settle into your bones. For all the pomp and poetry, one truth endures. Ice in Persia is both survival and spectacle. Tonight in the palace, it is a weapon of prestige. Tomorrow, in the bazaar, it will be a handful of slush passed to a thirsty child. Both matter, but here, under the gaze of kings, it becomes a statement carved in frost. When you finally step away from the palace gates, you carry the taste of pomegranate ice on your tongue and the faint suspicion that bragging rights in Persia are always best served cold. The palace fades into silence behind you, its music trailing off like smoke. But before you drift too far into the comfort of royal poetry and saffron ice, it's time to follow the quieter path, the one that bends toward the workers who make all this possible. Without them, the yakhchals would stand empty, the sherbet stalls would sell nothing colder than lukewarm syrup, and kings would be left bragging about carpets instead of ice. Tonight, you walk alongside the diggers, carriers, and builders whose names rarely enter chronicles, yet whose sweat cools every noble's brow. You find them gathered at dawn, just outside the city, where straw bundles and wooden sledges lean against the wall of a caravanserai. Their hands are calloused, their robes patched, their sandals cracked, but their eyes carry the calm of people who know a craft. They laugh easily, slap each other's shoulders, and exchange jokes that rise like bread in the early morning. The mountains wait for them, the yakhchals wait for them, and the city will never notice them, unless the ice fails. Mainstream fact: laborers, often from poorer quarters of Persian cities, were essential to the ice economy. They dug qanat tunnels under dangerous conditions, hauled snow from mountains, carried blocks to yakhchals, and shaved ice for markets. Some were seasonal workers, others full-time specialists. Historical texts rarely record their names, but their existence is implied in every functioning ice house and every sip of Sherbet. You join a group loading straw-wrapped blocks of snow onto donkeys. The animals groan in protest, and one laborer pats his beast's neck, whispering encouragement. The caravan leader checks each bundle with a practiced eye. Too loose, and the snow melts too fast. Too tight, and the straw itself overheats. Quirky tidbit. Some workers even smeared mud over the straw to add an extra layer of insulation, making the packages look like lumps of clay hiding winter inside. As the sun climbs, the men share a small breakfast: flatbread, onions, and a jug of warm water. They joke that their breakfast could use a dash of ice, though no one wastes the precious blocks on themselves. Joke one wipes its brow and grins. Somewhere, an elite is sipping saffron ice, while the man who carried it chews a raw onion. Life is unfair, but at least the onion bites back. Later, you walk with a crew of mokanis, the qanat diggers. They climb down narrow shafts, ropes biting into their palms, to clear silt from the underground channels. Their tools are simple: short-handled picks, baskets, ropes, but their knowledge is profound. They listen for shifts in the earth, for the sound of dripping water, for the faint whisper of airflow. One man tells you that the qanat breathes like a beast, and you realize he isn't being poetic. He's just describing his daily reality. Historians still argue whether mokanis were organized into guilds with hereditary knowledge, or whether they were simply laborers trained on the job. Either way, their craft blended engineering with courage, and accidents were common. Mainstream fact number 2. Written accounts note that workers sometimes lost their lives to collapses, flooding, or suffocation inside qanats. Yet the work was considered honorable, and families often passed the skills down through generations. These men built systems so durable that some qanats still flow today, a millennium later. You climb out of the shaft, covered in dust, and find another team mixing saruj mortar for a yakhchal repair. They stir clay, sand, lime, ash, and hair into a muddy brew, their arms coated to the elbow. The smell is sharp, almost sour, but the workers hum as they work. One jokes that the wall will stand longer than any of their marriages. Joke 2 smirks through the dust. Saruj is basically ancient superglue, except instead of fixing a broken vase, it fixes your entire summer. Nearby, a group of ice carriers prepare for delivery. They chip blocks into manageable pieces, load them onto sledges, and drag them into the bazaar. The air fills with the crunch of straw, the creak of wood, the grunt of effort. Children run alongside, begging for slivers. Sometimes the men hand them chips. Sometimes they wave them away, depending on how generous or tired they feel. For the carriers, every step is a negotiation with the sun. At midday, the workers rest in the shade of a wall. One man dozes against his sack, another chews dried figs, and a third sharpens his scraper on a flat stone. They talk not of kings or poetry, but of practical things. Whether the mountain snows will last until harvest, whether the qanat's flow is weaker than last year, whether their wages will stretch far enough for their children's shoes. Their conversation is the hidden ledger behind every sherbet stall. Joke 3 sits cross-legged with them. If history had a guest list, these men would be marked as +1s, always present, rarely named, but absolutely essential. As evening cools the air, you realize how invisible their labor usually is. The palace guests never ask about the men who trudged up the mountain at midnight. The bazaar drinkers rarely think of the digger hunched in a tunnel, coughing in the dark. Yet the workers themselves don't seem bitter. They know the city depends on them. Their pride is quiet, unrecorded, but steady. You rise with them as they return to their quarters, shoulders aching, sandals dusty, laughter intact. Tomorrow they will climb, dig, carry, repair, all the unglamorous tasks that make glamour possible. The king may hold bragging rights, the nobles may recite poetry, the poets may sing metaphors, but the workers carry the weight of winter itself, and without them, summer would win. The workers retreat into sleep, their tools stacked neatly by doorways. But the story of Persian ice doesn't rest. It twists into the eccentric, the playful, the downright peculiar. Tonight, you step into the world of strange ice traditions, where practical invention meets whimsical experimentation, and where the line between dessert and dare sometimes blurs. If the yakhchal is the sober accountant of cold, this part of history is its cheeky cousin. You wander into a small courtyard lit by a single lamp. A family is gathered around a basin of ice, and instead of pouring rosewater or pomegranate syrup, they are sprinkling herbs. A boy tosses in thyme, a girl insists on dill, and the grandmother cackles as she adds fenugreek. The smell is less dessert and more stew, but everyone dips spoons anyway. Quirky tidbit. Some households indeed flavored ice with kitchen herbs, especially when syrups were scarce. The result? Somewhere between medicine and mischief. Mainstream fact. Medieval Persian texts describe a surprising variety of ice flavorings, including saffron, violet, musk, cucumber, and even vinegar-based syrups like second-jabin. Some concoctions were meant as tonics, balancing hot summer humors. Others were just culinary experiments that happened to make children grimace. You watch as the grandmother declares that her dill ice is good for the lungs. The children mutter rebellions, but they eat anyway, half amused, half resigned. Joke 1 strolls in carrying a spoon. Imagine if your grandmother gave you a bowl of dill-flavored ice cream today. Therapy would follow, but in Persia, it was medicine. Elsewhere, you encounter a nobleman who insists that his sherbet must be tinted with saffron until it looks like melted gold. He presents it in crystal goblets, believing the color itself strengthens the heart. His guests sip politely, though one whispers that the saffron taste is more bossy than refreshing. Historians still argue whether saffron ice was a rare luxury or a relatively common splurge in wealthier households. What's certain is that saffron became not only a flavor, but also a status symbol, an edible version of a peacock feather. Later, you find a traveler offering a peculiar recipe: snow mixed with pickled fruits. The tang is sharp, the salt unexpected, the cold shocking. Yet the combination works in a way that startles your tongue awake. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some Persian and Central Asian records mention mixing preserved fruits, even pickled plums or apricots, into icy drinks, a practice that seems bizarre today, but made sense in households that treasured every preserved flavor. Mainstream fact number 2. The Sherbet of second-jabin, vinegar, mint, and sugar, was one of the most popular and versatile icy drinks. Physicians praised it for cooling the blood and aiding digestion. It might sound odd to modern ears, but Persians adored the tang, and recipes endured for centuries. Even today, Iranians sip second-jabin with grated cucumber in summer, a ritual that has outlived empires. Joke 2 bounces off the basin rim. You could say vinegar ice was the original hardcore flavor, proof that Persians were centuries ahead of hipster cafes serving things like kale sorbet. The experimentation didn't stop at flavor. Some hosts froze decorations into the ice itself: rose petals, basil seeds, even tiny fruits suspended like jewels inside a block. A guest chipping into such a block might discover a violet flower trapped like an insect in amber, only colder and tastier. Imagine the gasp around the table when the hidden treasure appeared. You wonder if this was the first version of novelty ice cubes, long before plastic trays existed. Historians still argue whether these stranger traditions were widespread or limited to wealthy, playful households. Did ordinary families ever try dill ice? Or was it mostly nobles showing off? Were herbal ices considered serious medicine or just seasonal experiments? The truth may be somewhere in the middle. Culinary whimsy often slips between social classes, especially when children are involved. You sit on a bench, offered a cup of musk-flavored ice. The aroma is musky indeed, more perfume than food, and you hesitate. The host insists it is invigorating. You sip, and your tongue can't decide whether it's being seduced or scolded. Joke 3 lounges nearby with a grin. Musk-flavored ice is proof that not every innovation deserves applause, but at least it kept people talking. The night deepens, and you realize that strangeness is part of the charm. For every perfect rosewater sherbet, there was a dill experiment. For every saffron triumph, a musk misstep. The Persians treated ice not only as necessity and prestige, but also as canvas, a playground for curiosity. In their willingness to play with flavor, they revealed a culture that didn't just preserve winter, it preserved imagination. You finish your musk ice, still unsure whether to laugh or applaud, and stand to leave. The courtyard behind you erupts in debate, children cheering for sweet syrups, elders defending vinegar tonics, a poet declaring dill ice superior to all others. You smile, because even if the flavors divide tongues, the cold unites them. And in the desert, unity over ice is worth more than saffron. You wander from the herb-spiked courtyards toward a quieter quarter of the city, where words themselves seem to be chilled and flavored. Here, the poets live, scribbling by lamplight, dipping reed pens into ink while a cup of sherbet sweats on the sill. If ice was invention for builders and spectacle for kings, it was metaphor for poets. They could never resist turning a sip into a stanza, a frozen shard into a metaphor for love, longing, or paradise. You step into a garden where a circle of men reclines beneath cypress trees. One plucks at a setter, another fans the air lazily, and the third recites lines with the solemnity of someone convinced he is bottling eternity. His voice flows like syrup poured over ice, slow, sweet, unashamed. The verse compares a lover's lips to sherbet cooled with snow, sharp at first, then dissolving into sweetness. Everyone sighs, even the lutenist, who has clearly heard this one 100 times. Joke 1 leans in with a wink. Apparently, Persian poets had two favorite metaphors, wine and sherbet, and half the time they couldn't decide which cup to pick. Mainstream fact: Persian literary tradition, from classical poets like Sadi and Hafez to countless lesser-known voices, often used sherbet and chilled drinks as imagery for pleasure, paradise, or the bliss of companionship. In Islamic eschatology, paradise itself was sometimes described as flowing with sweet, cool drinks, so the poet's metaphor doubled as both earthly delight and heavenly promise. A young man in the circle improvises his own verse, clumsy but charming, likening faloodeh noodles to threads of moonlight caught in a bowl. His companions laugh, but kindly. Someone jots the line down anyway, because even clumsy metaphors can ripen later. Quirky tidbit: manuscripts survive with marginal notes about sherbets, sometimes doodles of cups alongside serious philosophical commentary, as if scholars themselves couldn't resist sneaking dessert into their theology. You are handed a cup of saffron sherbet as the poets debate rhyme schemes. The liquid glows golden, and as you sip, you can almost hear the words it has inspired. Historians still argue whether poetic descriptions of ice and sherbet reflected common experience. Did most people taste what poets praised? Or whether such verses exaggerated rarity into ideal? Perhaps sherbet was sometimes memory, sometimes wish, sometimes both. The sitar player pauses to tell a story. A poet once wrote of a dream in which the Prophet Muhammad offered him sherbet from paradise, and he awoke to find his lips wet and sweet. The listeners murmur approval, their eyes shining as if the story itself carried flavor. Joke 2 chuckles softly. You suspect more than a few poets dreamed of sherbet, when in fact they just snuck into the yakhchal at midnight. Mainstream fact number 2. In Persian ghazals and qasidas, sherbet was sometimes contrasted with wine. Wine represented passion, danger, ecstasy. Sherbet represented innocence, refreshment, clarity. Yet both served as vehicles for desire and transcendence. To choose one metaphor over the other was less about sobriety and more about the mood of the poem. A poet near you lifts his cup and recites lines likening the beloved's eyes to sherbet hidden under ice, a phrase that makes you blink in surprise. The idea is of sweetness veiled by coldness, love hidden beneath aloofness. The group nods wisely, as if this explains their last 3 romances. Someone scribbles the couplet into a notebook, probably to impress a future lover. The night air is cool, and the moonlight makes the sherbet glow like liquid pearl. The poets grow more animated, some declaiming boldly, others whispering verses like secrets. The sitar weaves accompaniment until the notes themselves seem to shimmer with cold. You realize that ice has become not just a flavor, but a rhythm. A way to slow speech, to savor each syllable as one savors each sip. Joke 3 curls up with the cushions. If a poet didn't compare your love to sherbet, did he really love you at all? Eventually, the gathering thins. One poet nods off mid-stanza, another wanders away to chase inspiration in the alleyways. The cups are empty now, their rims sticky, their contents melted. Yet the words they sparked linger in the air like perfume. You walk away under the cypress, carrying in your memory lines about moonlight noodles, saffron flames, and eyes colder than ice, but sweeter than syrup. In this city, even the poems are chilled, and as you leave the poet's garden, you understand that Persian ice didn't just cool tongues or impress kings, it cooled language itself, carving metaphors as carefully as blocks carved in straw. You leave the poets behind, their verses dissolving into night like syrup into ice, and head toward the city's quieter archives, the dusty corners where arguments have been fermenting for centuries. Tonight you're not watching snow hauled or Sherbet poured. Tonight you're listening to scholars quarrel in low, polite tones over who really invented this chilly delight. Did Persia invent ice cream? Or was it borrowed, adapted, improved? Every empire wants bragging rights, and even frozen desserts are not immune to territorial disputes. You sit in the corner of a scriptorium where manuscripts lie open on reed mats. The scholars are already mid-argument, voices restrained but sharp. One insists the Persians were first, citing descriptions of faloodeh as early as the Achaemenid period. He points to the ritual freezing of thin noodles in syrup, claiming it's the direct ancestor of modern ice cream. Another counters that the Chinese had iced treats even earlier, mixing snow with fermented rice or milk. A third insists the Romans collected mountain snow for their wines, centuries before Persians sharpened their scrapers. The fourth, already tired of the debate, mutters that everyone probably just figured out cold plus sweet equals good, independently. Joke 1 leans across the manuscripts. The true inventor of ice cream was probably the first overheated shepherd who dropped his figs into a snowdrift and decided not to waste them. Mainstream fact. While Persian innovations like the yakhchal and faloodeh are among the earliest documented cold desserts, China has records of chilled concoctions, and Mediterranean traditions of snow-mixed wine go back to antiquity. The difficulty lies in defining ice cream. If you require dairy, then later Arab and European experiments may take precedence. If you accept frozen syrups and noodles, then Persia holds a strong claim. One scholar dramatically waves a parchment describing Alexander the Great demanding snow cooled with honey and nectar during his campaigns. Another unfurls a text about Tang Dynasty China, where frozen milk-based treats supposedly delighted emperors. A third quotes from Arab cookbooks of the 10th century, noting sherbets flavored with fruits and cooled with snow. Historians still argue whether these represent parallel inventions or a chain of borrowing along the trade routes. The Silk Road, after all, trafficked not only silk and spices, but also recipes and cravings. Quirky tidbit. Medieval Arab texts sometimes describe recipes for milk ice, churned with saltpeter to hasten freezing. Whether these were practical or theoretical remains debated, but the principle hints at proto-ice cream centuries before Europeans formalized it. Meanwhile, Persian faloodeh kept to its distinctive noodle and syrup formula, a tradition so stubborn it survives almost unchanged today. You sip water as the scholars trade metaphors like swords. One insists Persia's genius was not just flavor, but infrastructure. The yakhchal, the qanat, the entire cold economy that made desserts a routine rather than a rarity. Another argues that invention belongs to whoever first combined milk and ice into something scoopable. A third insists that every culture with mountains and sweet tooths dabbled in icy treats sooner or later. The debate could last all night. Joke 2 shrugs from the corner. Whoever invented it, the real winner is you, centuries later, eating pistachio ice cream while scrolling on your phone. Mainstream fact number 2. By the 17th century, Europeans began experimenting with freezing cream, sugar, and flavorings using salt and ice mixtures, creating the texture we now call ice cream. Whether they learned the principles from Arab science, Persian sherbet culture, or through their own tinkering remains a historical puzzle. What's clear is that the Persian tradition of frozen syrups and faloodeh influenced the vocabulary and ideas that traveled westward. One weary scholar finally declares, "Perhaps invention does not matter. What matters is continuity." He gestures toward the courtyard outside, where even now a boy buys a sliver of ice to drop into his sherbet. Persia made it a habit, he says, and that is its true achievement. The others mutter, half convinced, half still preparing counterarguments. You realize they could argue until dawn and still leave the parchment ink damp with uncertainty. Joke 3 yawns across the table. History may never decide who invented ice cream, but it's unanimous about who perfected the art of arguing about it. As the lamps gutter low, the scholars pack their scrolls. Some roll their eyes, others chuckle, all of them certain that the debate will resume tomorrow. You step out into this cool night, amused that even something as simple as a frozen dessert can ignite centuries of scholarly rivalry. The truth may be blurred like flavors melting together, but one thing is clear. Persia left an indelible spoon mark on the bowl of history, and whether first or not, its role is unforgettable. The scholars' quarrels dissolve behind you, their parchments rustling like annoyed geese, and your path bends eastward, across deserts, mountains, and centuries toward India. Here, Persian sherbet and faloodeh step into a new world of spices, gardens, and emperors, with palates as ambitious as their palaces. If Persia perfected the ice economy, Mughal India gave it flair, serving frozen delights under domes of marble while peacocks strutted in the courtyards. You arrive in the court of the Mughal emperors, where fountains sparkle under moonlight and servants glide across marble floors with trays heavy enough to wobble. The air smells of cardamom, sandalwood, and roasted meats. But what captures attention is the cold. In a land where summer could flatten armies, the ability to serve sherbet chilled was proof that the empire could tame even the climate. Mainstream fact: the Mughal emperors of India, beginning with Babur in the 16th century, inherited Persian cultural influences, including gardens, poetry, and cuisine. Among these imports was the tradition of sherbet and icy desserts. Accounts mention caravans bringing snow from Kashmir and Afghanistan, as well as experimentation with saltpeter for artificial freezing. The result? Mughal courts where ice, flavored water, and even early ice creams were staples of summer feasts. You watch as a servant shaves ice into bowls of faloodeh, the Indian descendant of Persian faloodeh, now layered with vermicelli noodles, rose syrup, sweet basil seeds, and thickened milk. The guests lean forward, spoons ready. A prince declares it tastes like threads of moonlight drowned in perfume. A poet quickly scribbles that line, pretending it was his idea. Quirky tidbit: Mughal faloodeh sometimes included silver leaf on top, because nothing says refreshing like eating precious metals. Historians still argue whether the Mughals truly innovated ice preservation or relied mainly on imported snow. Some sources describe elaborate snow caravans from the Himalayas. Others suggest experiments with ice pits, similar to Persian yakhchals. There are even accounts of courtly kitchens using saltpeter to chill liquids, a precursor to refrigeration chemistry. Whatever the method, the result was the same: sherbets in goblets of jade, faloodeh served in porcelain bowls, and emperors who could sip winter in Delhi. Joke 1 tiptoes in wearing silk slippers. If you ever doubted that ruling an empire was stressful, remember they literally invented eat ice, not feelings. A servant places a bowl before you. The noodles are softer than Persian ones, swimming in sweet milk. The basil seeds bob like tiny stars. Rose syrup drips down the sides like ruby tears. You take a spoonful, and the cold surprises you even though you expected it. The flavor is lush, the sweetness generous, the texture playful. If Persian faloodeh was restraint, Mughal faloodeh is excess. Layered, rich, determined to impress. Mainstream fact number 2. Mughal cookbooks, such as the Aini Akbari compiled under Akbar, describe flavored sherbets made with fruit juices, spices, and flowers. These drinks often accompanied lavish feasts and were served not only for pleasure, but also as cooling remedies in hot weather. Some recipes hint at frozen versions, suggesting the line between drink and dessert blurred here too. Quirky tidbit number 2. At some Mughal banquets, sherbets were served from fountains, literally flowing across courtyards so guests could ladle icy drinks as they strolled. Imagine sipping from a fountain of rosewater snow while elephants trumpet outside the palace gates. Joke 2 lounges under a marble arch. The Mughals may have built the Taj Mahal for love, but faloodeh fountains were the real romance. The courtiers gossip between bites. One claims Persian sherbet is still purer. Another insists Indian faloodeh has surpassed it with cream and milk. The debate is friendly but fierce, echoing the scholarly quarrels you left behind. Everyone agrees, however, that without Persian roots, the Mughal tradition would be unthinkable. The sherbet in your bowl is both inheritance and reinvention. As night falls, musicians play sitar and tabla, their rhythms weaving through the clink of spoons. Lanterns glow against white marble, reflecting pools shimmer, and the emperor himself leans back, satisfied. He may command armies and provinces, but in this moment, what matters is that his sherbet is cold, his faloodeh sweet, his guests dazzled. Prestige tastes like saffron, rosewater, and snow. Joke 3 raises its spoon. Conquering cities may earn you history books, but inventing the best dessert earns you immortality at the dinner table. You step away from this banquet, faloodeh still coating your tongue, and realize how far the Persian invention has traveled. What began as a humble yakhchal in Yazd has become a spectacle in Agra, transformed by milk, sugar, and empire. The debate over origins may never end, but here, in Mughal India, ice has found a new identity. Ornamented, exuberant, and inseparable from the grandeur of its court. You step away from the marble fountains of Mughal India and follow the caravan trails westward, where Persian sherbet traditions found yet another home, in Ottoman lands. If the Persians invented the stage and the Mughals built a palace around it, the Ottomans turned ice into a café habit, weaving it into the pulse of urban life. In Istanbul, sherbet was not just a luxury for kings, but a shared ritual in bazaars, gardens, and coffee houses that buzzed with gossip and steam. You find yourself in a crowded square near the Bosphorus, where a sherbet seller in a bright robe balances a brass tank on his back. The tank gleams like a miniature samovar, curved spout ready to pour. With a practiced shout, he calls customers, offering cups of icy sekanjaban and fruit syrups cooled with chipped ice hauled from Anatolian mountains. He moves quickly, selling refreshment to boatmen, merchants, and sleepy students alike. Joke 1 struts down the cobblestones. In Ottoman Istanbul, Uber Eats was basically just one very sweaty guy with a brass backpack. Mainstream fact: by the 16th and 17th centuries, Ottoman cities had a vibrant culture of sherbet sellers, who roamed streets with portable tanks. They offered sweet, chilled drinks flavored with herbs, fruits, and spices, sometimes served with snow or ice. Records describe sherbets made of tamarind, violet, licorice, lemon, and more. Ice was stored in underground pits or shipped from mountain snowfields, echoing Persian practices. You duck into a coffee house nearby. Men sit cross-legged on cushions, sipping coffee thick as tar, then alternating with sweet sherbets to cleanse the palate. The two beverages live in playful rivalry, bitter versus sweet, hot versus cold. The sherbet arrives in glass cups, clinking with tiny chips of ice. Outside, the call to prayer drifts over rooftops. Inside, the chatter blends with the slurp of chilled fruit water. Quirky tidbit: sherbet shops sometimes doubled as informal pharmacies, selling herbal mixes for coughs, headaches, or lovesickness. If your heart ached, a sherbet seller might prescribe tamarind with sugar and a little snow. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans learned their sherbet traditions directly from Persia or through a wider Islamic culinary exchange. What is certain is that Persian influence shaped their vocabulary, techniques, and love of cold drinks, even as the Ottomans added their own flavors and urban flair. You watch as a janissary officer strides in, his uniform dusty from the street. He orders a violet sherbet on ice, savoring it with the seriousness of a general inspecting troops. Meanwhile, two poets nearby argue about whether lemon sherbet tastes better with or without basil seeds. The entire scene is more democratic than the Persian palace or Mughal banquet. Here, ice isn't only prestige, it's participation. Mainstream fact number 2. Ottoman records show sherbets were so popular that they were served at weddings, funerals, circumcisions, and state festivals. Vendors handed them out to the public during imperial celebrations, often in decorated cups, turning icy drinks into a tool of mass hospitality. Snow and ice were therefore commodities managed carefully by city officials to meet both public and ceremonial demand. Joke 2 plops onto a cushion. Nothing says congratulations on your circumcision quite like a cold glass of tamarind sherbet. You step back into the street, following a crowd toward the hippodrome, where a public celebration is underway. Tents line the square, offering food, music, and of course, sherbet in endless flavors. Children gulp icy grape sherbet until their lips turn purple. Women carry trays of rose sherbet to share among family groups. Even the Sultan's emissaries join in, handing out free cups to remind the people of imperial generosity. You realize that ice here is not only a sign of wealth, but a bond between ruler and ruled, a chilled bridge of loyalty. Quirky tidbit number 2. In some Ottoman festivities, fountains were rigged to spout sherbet instead of water, a dazzling spectacle that made the city itself seem to drink. Imagine standing in a square where spigots gush tamarind or rosewater, while ice chips float like petals. The sun dips lower, and the sherbet seller with the brass tank returns, now emptier but still calling out his song. His tank clinks with a few last cubes of ice, his steps slower, but his smile intact. People wave him down, not wanting to miss the final cups of the day. Joke 3 pats his shoulder. The true Ottoman hero wasn't the Sultan. It was the guy who carried 40 pounds of brass, syrup, and ice through cobbled alleys without tripping. As the crowd disperses, you taste one last violet sherbet. Its floral sweetness lingers on your tongue, faintly cool even as the night warms with lamps and chatter. You realize how far Persian ice has traveled, not only geographically, but socially. In Persia, it began as survival and prestige. In the Mughal world, it became opulent spectacle. In Ottoman cities, it transformed into urban ritual, a drink that belonged to everyone, carried through streets in brass tanks and served in glass cups with a flourish. You leave the square with sticky lips, amused at how something as simple as snow could stitch together empires, faiths, and palates. And somewhere in the distance, you hear the sherbet seller's last call echoing across the Bosphorus, a lullaby of syrup and ice. The Bosphorus fades behind you, the sherbet seller's last call still ringing in your ears, and you follow the currents of trade farther west. Caravans and ships carry not only spices and silks, but also flavors, recipes, and whispers of strange frozen wonders. By the 16th century, European nobles are catching the chill. If the Persians had perfected the infrastructure and the Ottomans the street culture, Italy and France turned icy desserts into the new currency of fashion. Ice, once a desert miracle, becomes a European obsession, and bragging rights now come gilded with lace collars and silver spoons. You first step into Renaissance Italy, where Catherine de' Medici's entourage gossips about sorbetto. The cooks have learned of sherbets through Arab and Persian intermediaries, flavored with lemons, sugar, and, when possible, snow or ice. Snow is hauled down from the Apennines, stored in pits, much like Persian yakhchals, though the Italians don't call them that. At grand feasts, small cups of icy fruit water appear between meat courses, shocking guests' tongues into attention. Mainstream fact: sorbet, directly descended from Sherbet, entered Italy by the 16th century, spreading quickly among elites who adored both its refreshment and exotic pedigree. Joke 1 saunters in with a smirk. Forget opera or painting. The true Renaissance innovation was figuring out how to keep your lemon juice cold long enough to impress your neighbors. From Italy, the fashion leaps to France. At Versailles, Louis XIV's court marvels at glaces. Early ice creams churned with cream, sugar, and fruit. Guests gasp as bowls of frozen confections arrive, marveling less at the taste than at the miracle that anything solid and cold could appear indoors in July. Quirky tidbit: French kitchens experimented with everything from strawberry ice to asparagus ice, a flavor that almost certainly divided opinions faster than politics. Historians still argue whether European elites developed freezing techniques independently or whether they borrowed heavily from Arab and Persian knowledge. The principle of using salt to lower the freezing point of ice circulated through Arabic scientific texts, which may have reached Europe through Sicily, Spain, or trade. Either way, Europeans seized the idea with enthusiasm, expanding the concept from frozen syrups to milk-based concoctions that we would recognize as ice cream today. You sip a spoonful of French pistachio ice, served in a porcelain dish. It's richer than Persian faloodeh, heavier, creamier, less about refreshment than indulgence. You miss the light rosewater touch, but admit this version has its charms. Mainstream fact number 2, by the late 17th century, ice cream shops had opened in Paris and London, serving aristocrats and curious travelers alike. Recipes spread rapidly, though ice remained expensive and tied to social prestige. At a ball, a powdered noblewoman sighs over her raspberry ice and declares it proof that France has surpassed the East. Her companion disagrees, insisting that Persian sherbet remains the purest form of the art. You smile into your cup, recognizing the same debate replayed in different costumes. Prestige, it seems, always wants a chilled drink at the table. Joke 2 hides behind a fan. If Versailles had invented TikTok, every clip would just be nobles dramatically tasting ice cream and pretending it changed their lives. The spread continues across Europe. In England, Samuel Pepys famously notes eating ice cream in his diary in 1660s London. In Vienna, coffee houses experiment with cold drinks in summer, blending the Ottoman love of sherbet with European taste for dairy. By the 18th century, ice cream is fashionable across courts, though still rare for commoners until industrialization. Yet even amid this European enthusiasm, the lineage whispers. The word sorbet comes from sherbet, itself from the Arabic shariba, to drink. The techniques echo the Persians' cleverness with ice pits and snow transport, and the prestige is the same. To serve cold in summer is to declare mastery, wealth, and style. Quirky tidbit number 2. In Naples, some cooks experimented with chocolate ice so bitter that guests had to mix it with sweet wine. Records note that a few noblemen tried to look impressed while secretly grimacing. Proof that not every frozen experiment is a winner. Joke 3 lingers with a raised spoon. Europe may have perfected the silk stocking, but the true flex was showing up at a ball with brain freeze and pretending it was elegance. You leave Versailles with sticky lips and a smirk, marveling at how far the Persian invention has traveled. From the mountain snowfields of Yazd to the chandeliers of Paris, ice has shifted shape, but the logic remains constant. Cold plus sweet equals wonder. In Persia, it was survival and poetry. In Europe, it became indulgence and fashion. And soon, it would become something else entirely. Science. The gilded halls of Versailles dissolve behind you, their chandeliers fading into the dark, and you find yourself in a quieter chamber, lined not with silk but with shelves of books, instruments, and jars of curious powders. Tonight, the story of Persian ice takes another turn, from poetry and politics into the realm of science. If kings and poets treated ice as wonder, natural philosophers treated it as a puzzle. Why does salt make ice colder? Why does water sometimes freeze quickly, sometimes not at all? For every cup of sherbet enjoyed in a palace, there was a scholar somewhere scratching his head, spoon in hand, trying to explain the trick. You lean over the shoulder of an Italian alchemist. His table is cluttered with bowls of ice, lumps of saltpeter, and thermometers, glass tubes filled with dyed alcohol that rise and fall like sleepy snakes. He sprinkles salt onto a mound of ice, places a flask inside, and gasps as the mixture drops below freezing. His apprentice scribbles furiously, pretending not to taste the experiment when the master's back is turned. Mainstream fact. By the 17th century, European natural philosophers were studying refrigeration scientifically. They discovered that mixing salt, or saltpeter, with ice lowered the freezing point of water, allowing liquids to freeze faster. This principle, likely borrowed through Arabic scientific texts and practical recipes, was the foundation of early modern ice cream making. Quirky tidbit. One 17th century recipe book suggested that to freeze wine into slush, you should bury the flask in snow and salt and stir merrily until it bites. Apparently, science in those days came with a side of tipsy enthusiasm. Historians still argue whether knowledge of salt-assisted freezing reached Europe directly through Islamic scientific texts, like those of Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, or through Italian experimenters rediscovering the principle. What is certain is that once the trick was known, it spread like wildfire across courts and kitchens. Joke 1 nudges the apprentice. Every scientific breakthrough has a secret hero, and in this case, it was probably the poor assistant sneaking spoonfuls of frozen wine when the experiment was inconclusive. You move to another chamber, this time in England. Robert Boyle and his colleagues of the Royal Society are running cold experiments, watching mercury contract, wondering about the very nature of heat. They place meat, fruit, even small animals into freezing mixtures to test how quickly life yields to cold. Some experiments are gruesome, but others are strangely whimsical. Frozen flowers that shatter when tapped, fruits turned into icy jewels. Science, in this moment, is both ruthless and childlike. Mainstream fact number 2. The study of freezing and cold helped shape early thermodynamics. Experiments with ice and salt paved the way for later understanding of temperature scales, heat transfer, and eventually the physics that power modern refrigeration. So yes, your pint of pistachio ice cream owes something to men in wigs freezing roses for fun. Quirky tidbit number 2. In 1662, Pepys wrote of eating a kind of frozen milk cream, while Boyle was simultaneously writing about how salt hastens congelation. History, it seems, records the dessert and the footnote side by side. Joke 2 slides into the lab with a shiver. Imagine being the servant sent to fetch snow for these experiments. You'd come back sweaty, arms full of ice, only to hear, "Excellent! Now we shall freeze this apple just to see what happens." You wander further, into a French salon where fashionable philosophers gather. They sip chocolate while debating whether cold is a substance, a fluid, or simply the absence of heat. One insists cold flows from ice into water. Another claims heat escapes instead. They argue, but all of them agree on one thing. The ability to make sherbet in July is the most delightful proof of theory. Historians still argue whether scientific curiosity about ice was spurred by culinary needs or by deeper philosophical questions. Did people study freezing because they wanted tastier desserts? Or did tastier desserts become a convenient excuse to fund freezing research? The line is thin, like frost on a window pane. You pick up a spoon from the table and taste a frozen lemon cream, tart and sharp, cooled with salt and ice. The texture is rough, halfway between slush and pudding, but the delight is unmistakable. You can't help but smile, realizing that this experiment tastes suspiciously like dessert. Joke 3 wipes frost from its beard. When science and snacks overlap, progress becomes inevitable. As the night deepens, the scholars pack away their thermometers. The apprentices sneak one last spoonful, and the candles gutter. You step outside into the cool air, reflecting on the strange marriage of delight and discovery. From Persian yakhchals to European laboratories, ice has always been more than refreshment. It is a teacher. And every time someone asked, "Why does this work?" while sipping a cold sherbet, the world edged closer to modern science. You step out of the candlelit salons and into a world humming with pistons, gears, and steam. The centuries slide forward, and suddenly it isn't only kings or poets or philosophers thinking about ice. It's entrepreneurs, machinists, and inventors. The 19th century has no patience for mountain caravans or straw bundles. It wants ice on demand, 24 hours a day, for everyone from sailors to street vendors. This is the era when ice finally breaks free from the tyranny of seasons and altitude, when technology takes over the work once handled by mountains and mocanis. You find yourself at the Boston docks in the early 1800s, watching men load giant blocks of frozen New England lake ice onto ships bound for Calcutta, Havana, and Rio de Janeiro. The ice is insulated with sawdust, a byproduct of the lumber industry that turns out to be perfect for the job. Mainstream fact: This trade, pioneered by Frederick Tudor, the so-called Ice King, carried thousands of tons of natural ice around the globe. He became a wealthy man, convincing people in the tropics that what they really needed was frozen water from Massachusetts. Joke 1 leans on a barrel. Imagine explaining to a Persian ice carrier that centuries later, ships would haul ice across oceans just so sweaty colonials could have cooler lemonade. He'd probably shrug and say, "Sounds like overkill? Try a yakhchal." But even Tudor's empire was just the prelude. You walk into a workshop where inventors experiment with chemical refrigeration. Machines clank, belts whir, and brass cylinders exhale frost. These contraptions use compressed gases, first ether, then ammonia, to pull heat from water and force it to freeze. The first working ice-making machine appears in the mid-19th century, and suddenly, snow caravans and storage pits look quaint. Quirky tidbit. An Australian inventor named James Harrison built one of the first successful commercial ice machines in the 1850s, originally intended for breweries and meat preservation. Beer, it seems, has always been a loyal sponsor of innovation. Historians still argue whether the cultural meaning of ice shifted most dramatically with Tudor's trade in natural ice or with the advent of artificial refrigeration. Was it the global circulation of lake ice that made cold ordinary? Or was it the machine's promise of infinite supply? Either way, by the late 19th century, the old Persian relationship between snow and survival had been replaced by something more industrial. Ice as commodity. Ice as infrastructure. You stroll through a Parisian cafe in the 1870s, where waiters serve ice cream daily, not seasonally. No mountains involved, no yakhchals, just machines humming in the cellar. For the first time in history, a family of modest means can afford a scoop on a summer afternoon. Mainstream fact number 2. By the late 1800s, ice cream had become a democratized dessert in Europe and America, sold from street carts and shops, no longer limited to elites. The Industrial Revolution turned what had once been royal bragging rights into a treat for children with pennies. Joke 2 rolls in on squeaky wheels. You can thank centuries of Persian ingenuity every time you chase down a modern ice cream truck. The song might be different, but the thrill is the same. Meanwhile, in Persia itself, the old yakhchals continue their quiet work. Some communities still use them, layering snow and straw as they have for centuries. But alongside, new technologies arrive. Imported ice machines, electric refrigeration, even railroads carrying blocks of manufactured ice into bazaars. Quirky tidbit number 2. In Tehran by the early 20th century, advertisements bragged about factory-made ice, which was considered both modern and slightly suspicious compared to the trustworthy yakhchal. Progress has always needed good marketing. In America, ice houses expand to serve not just desserts but entire industries. Railcars packed with ice carry fresh meat across states. Breweries churn out beer chilled all year. Hospitals begin to rely on ice for preserving medicines. The scope of cold expands until it touches nearly every aspect of life. From luxury, ice becomes necessity. Historians still argue whether this industrial spread diminished the cultural magic of ice. Did the machine kill the poetry? Or did it simply widen the audience, letting millions taste what once was reserved for kings? The answer may be both. You sip a simple lemon ice from a New York street vendor and admit, it isn't a saffron sherbet served on a golden tray, but the delight is still there. Coldness itself is the luxury, however it arrives. Joke 3 tips its hat from the street corner. The yakhchal might scoff, but somewhere, a Persian poet is grinning. His metaphor for love has just gone global, now sold on cones with sprinkles. As the century ends, refrigeration technology grows sleeker, quieter, more powerful. The world is no longer at the mercy of altitude or season. Cold has been domesticated. You can't help but think back to the Persians, layering straw over snow under domes of mud brick, harnessing physics with patience and wit. They would recognize the principle, even if they'd laugh at the machines. The dream is the same, to hold winter in summer, to sip refreshment in the heat, to tell the sun that it does not always get the last word. The steam and sawdust of the 19th century fade, and you step into the present day. Streets buzzing with neon signs, freezers humming in every kitchen, and shelves stacked with flavors your Persian sherbet seller would never have dreamed of. And yet, if you squint past the packaging and electricity, you can still trace the fingerprints of Persia in every scoop. Tonight you taste the echoes of the old yakhchals in the cones and cups of modern desserts, where saffron still glows, rosewater still perfumes, and faloodeh still tangles its noodles. You begin in Tehran, wandering into a modest shop with a sign painted in cheerful yellow. Behind the counter, a man in a white apron pulls out a tub of bastani sonati, traditional ice cream. He scoops it with a flat paddle into your bowl. The color is pale gold from saffron, streaked with green pistachios, laced with threads of frozen cream that stretch like chewy ribbons. You taste, and suddenly centuries collapse. This isn't French custard ice cream or American Rocky Road. This is Persia speaking directly. Saffron, rosewater, cream, and cold. A flavor that carries poetry without needing verses. Mainstream fact: Bastani Sonati, Persian saffron ice cream, remains one of Iran's most beloved desserts today, sold in shops and roadside stands. Its ingredients, saffron, rosewater, pistachios, are centuries old, bridging past and present. The technique may use freezers now, but the soul of the dessert still belongs to the yakhchal tradition. Quirky tidbit: some versions of bastani include salep, powdered orchid root, which gives the ice cream a stretchy, elastic texture. Salep has been prized since Ottoman times, and though now rare and expensive, its presence in ice cream feels like history sneaking into your spoon. Joke 1 tugs at your sleeve. If you ever wanted your ice cream to double as a bungee cord, Persian bastani is here to help. You cross the street and find another stall selling faloodeh. This version is Shirazi faloodeh, icy noodles floating in lime syrup, sometimes topped with sour cherry juice. The texture is still peculiar, still delightful. Children slurp the noodles, giggling as they slide down. Adults savor the tartness that cuts through summer heat. You sip, and the memory of your night in ancient Persia returns. The mountain snow, the straw, the sherbet stall. Faloodeh is living history, not just memory. Historians still argue whether modern faloodeh is directly continuous with the Achaemenid or Sasanian versions, or whether it evolved through later Islamic culinary traditions. Either way, the resemblance is undeniable. It is one of the oldest continuously eaten frozen desserts in the world. You fly farther east, landing in India again, where faloodeh thrives on bustling streets. Here it has grown bolder, more layered: rose syrup, vermicelli, basil seeds, ice cream scoops, even jellies. It is messy, indulgent, exuberant. Vendors pile the ingredients into tall glasses until they look like stained glass windows you can drink. Mainstream fact number 2: faloodeh remains a staple across India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, especially during Ramadan evenings, where it cools and restores after fasting. A direct descendant of Persian faloodeh, it shows how traditions adapt and flourish. Quirky tidbit number 2: some faloodeh vendors compete to make their glasses taller than their rivals, stacking layers of ice and syrup like architectural projects. Customers joke that you need scaffolding just to finish one. Joke 2 licks a spoon with a grin. Faloodeh is basically the dessert equivalent of saying, "Yes, I'd like all of the above, please." Your journey takes you west, to gelato stands in Rome, sorbet carts in Paris, ice cream trucks in Chicago. The flavors are different: vanilla, chocolate, cookie dough, but the DNA of Persian sherbet is still present in the idea that cold sweetness belongs to everyone, not just kings. The methods may be industrial now, the freezers humming instead of domes radiating, but the thrill is the same. That first shocking bite of cold on a hot day, the way your shoulders drop, the way you sigh without meaning to. Historians still argue whether we should credit Persia, China, Rome, or Europe with the invention of ice cream. But really, the persistence of saffron ice cream in Tehran, faloodeh in Delhi, and sorbet in Paris suggests that the answer is all of them, braided together like flavors melting in one bowl. The invention isn't a single point. It's a constellation. Joke 3 tosses a pistachio into your cup. If history were an ice cream sundae, Persia would definitely be the first scoop, rosewater flavored with saffron sprinkles. You sit on a park bench, licking saffron ice cream from a paper cup, watching children chase each other with cones of neon-colored gelato. Somewhere nearby, an old man orders faloodeh with lime, savoring it the way his ancestors did. You smile, realizing that ice's journey from mountain snow to global desert hasn't erased its Persian roots. Instead, it has spread them, quiet, fragrant, stubborn as saffron threads. Modern freezers may have replaced yakhchals, but the dream remains the same. To hold winter in the palm of your hand, to let sweetness melt across your tongue while the sun sulks overhead. Persia's gift still whispers in every scoop, every sip, every sigh of relief. The saffron melts on your tongue as the streetlights blur into halos. For a moment you close your eyes and imagine you're back in the Persian desert, centuries ago, when the first snow caravans trudged down from the mountains and the first yakhchal walls rose against the heat. The hum of modern freezers fades. In its place, you hear donkeys grumbling under their straw-wrapped loads, children clapping at the clink of ice in a jug, poets rhyming sherbet with moonlight, kings raising frosted cups like scepters. All of it circles back to one question. How did Persians, of all people, learn to keep cool in the hottest of lands? The answer, you've discovered, is patience. Patience with clay, with night skies, with physics itself. You wander into the desert, away from palaces and bazaars, until the city is only a pale glow behind you. The sand is still warm under your sandals, but the air cools with every step. You picture the yakhchal domes scattered like ancient guardians, each one a sleeping whale that swallows winter and exhales it months later. Their mud brick ribs gleam faintly in moonlight, simple and monumental at once. Beside one dome, a qanat shaft sighs, pulling the night's chill into its lungs. You sit at the edge, listening to the drip of hidden water, and feel the old balance of earth and sky. Mainstream fact: Persian builders mastered passive cooling not only for ice houses, but for homes and storage. Windcatchers, qanats, and yakhchals together created a system that allowed life to thrive in desert climates long before electricity. Their lessons still inspire sustainable architecture today. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believed that sleeping near a yakhchal on summer nights brought sweeter dreams, as if the cold seeping through the earth could hush nightmares. You almost believe it yourself, sitting here with the night brushing your skin. Historians still argue whether Persia's ice culture should be considered a first refrigeration system, or simply a clever adaptation of older mountain practices. But under the stars, the arguments feel unimportant. What matters is that the ice lasted. What matters is that a child in Yazd, in Shiraz, in Isfahan, could taste snow in July and know the desert had not won. Joke 1 stretches across the sand. If you ever doubted Persian stubbornness, remember they looked at the hottest desert on earth and said, "You know what we need here? Ice cream." The night deepens, and you lie back on the sand. The sky is heavy with constellations, the Milky Way a pale sherbet poured across the heavens. The air is cool now, even a little crisp, and you realize you don't need a fan or a freezer. The desert has made its own lullaby. Yakhchals, qanats, snow caravans, sherbets, faloodeh. All of it was just a way to borrow from this same night, to bottle its mercy and pour it back into the day. Joke 2 whispers beside you. Somewhere, an ancient Persian engineer is shaking his head at your refrigerator, muttering, "Cute, but mine ran on stars." You close your eyes, remembering all the hands that carried cold through history. The mechanics in their tunnels, the carriers trudging with donkeys, the cooks stirring saffron syrups, the poets scribbling by lanterns. Their work wasn't just to preserve food or impress kings. It was to remind themselves, and you, that even in the fiercest heat, relief is possible. Cold can be coaxed out of the most unlikely places. Winter can be folded into summer, if you know where to look. Joke 3 drifts like a sigh. If life hands you lemons in the desert, make lemon sherbet. Just don't forget the ice. The desert exhales. The stars brighten. Your breathing slows until it matches the rhythm of the earth's hidden qanats, steady and cool. The wind down. Now as you lie here, let your mind soften the edges. Picture the domes of the yakhchals glowing pale under the moon, their thick walls holding silence as carefully as they once held snow. Imagine the cool air slipping over your skin like a shawl woven from starlight. Let your thoughts slow to the pace of dripping water underground, patient, unhurried, certain of its course. Breathe deeply and see the caravans fade into shadows, the Sherbet stalls closing their shutters, the poets falling asleep mid-verse. Even the kings put down their cups, satisfied that winter will still be waiting tomorrow. All of them grow quiet, and in that quiet, you are safe. Each breath carries away the heat of the day. Each exhale leaves you lighter. You drift across centuries as easily as ice across water, carried gently, without effort. Let the coolness settle into your bones. Let the stillness of the desert cradle you. And as your eyes grow heavy, remember, somewhere, far away, snow still waits on the mountains, patient as ever, keeping its promise that relief will always return. Good night, my friend. Sleep well.